just like a route separation perspective, Ted McMillan's in the same ballpark as Brian Thomas.
When you take a look at man zone scores, 70.4% success rate versus man, 81% success rate versus zone, and he clears both of those benchmarks that we look for in straight up good players.
He's a real deal menace is McMillan on comeback routes.
Look at the release.
There's your separation.
Great route.
Stutter and go. Gets by clean.
That is unbelievable.
Maybe the greatest catch I've ever seen.
Where do you want to start, man? Ted McMillan, Matthew Golden, Emeka Ibuka. Where do you want to start, pal?
Let's start with McMillan because, Travis Hunter aside, which, by the way, if you're listening to this right now, Travis Hunter will be dropped on the site on next Monday. He will be a part of because in case you're new to Reception Perception, what we started doing last year, what we're doing this season as well, I dropped the first batch of profiles on Monday of this week. Every Monday leading up to the NFL draft, I'm going to drop at least 3 to 4 profiles on the site. So, might not get as many guys as we got last year because this class definitely drops off a cliff
lighter
at some point.
Yeah,
It's a little bit lighter, both at the top and from a depth perspective. However, every week leading up to the draft, new profiles are going to hit the site. Travis Hunter will be a part of next week's batch.
Amazing.
But if you are a site subscriber, join the Discord, get your role validated because that thing is in the sneak preview channel in the Discord right now, James. And I got to tell you what, it's popping. The Travis Hunter profile is popping. But Travis Hunter aside, Tet McMillan, Tetairoa McMillan, he likes to go by T-Mac, by the way. He told us that. He told us that actually at the Super Bowl when he was on our set at Yahoo. He said that plenty since then. He wants to be called T-Mac. So T-Mac is generally considered the top receiver prospect, Travis Hunter aside. So we should start with him.
6'4", 220 pounds. At his pro day, he ran a 40 either in the high 4.4s, low 4.5s, but given his size, that is incredibly impressive speed. When I watched him play, I saw a lot of Drake London. I don't know if that flies with you, but that's kind of sort of where my mind went to when I saw Tet McMillan. What did you find?
Yeah, so on the 40 thing, it depends on who you're listening to. Like, how connected are they to his agent?
Very connected to the agent, ran in the high 4.4s.
Yeah, ran a 4.4. Not as connected, maybe 4.3,
4.5,
4.53, 4.55. Which, by the way, is fine. We don't have to
funny.
like. At the combine, when I heard people say like, yeah, he might run a 4.6, 4.7, I was like, oh my god, that's not great. That would then we'd have to pretend to care about it. But now that he's running in the 4.5, we don't have to pretend to care about his 40. It's whatever. Because I think that generally maps to how he plays, in my opinion. When I remember watching him, and people were saying that at the combine, I was like, I don't see a 4. I certainly do not see a 4.7 player.
No, God.
Now at the combine, if he's running a 4.5 at his pro day, maybe he would have run a 4.6 at the combine. I don't know, but like, guess what? Drake London never ran a 40. He probably is not like anything more than a high 4.5 guy, low 4.6 guy. Marvin Harrison never ran a 40. He's honestly probably about the same. Like, Mike Williams, everybody's hoping better than Mike Williams, but like Mike Williams ran a high in the 4.5s ish or whatever. Anyways, so on the Drake London thing, I actually don't think he compares to London in a couple of ways. Stylistically, I would say they actually belong to like what I would call the same family of wide receivers. And that family of wide receivers is like better than you think at separating X receiver. I would say that the peak of that archetype is probably New Orleans Saints wide receiver Michael Thomas. And then I would think Drake London is right there at kind of the number 2 spot in that family. Also part of that family is like Michael Pittman, Cortland Sutton. I think T-Mac is maybe a little bit closer to the Michael Pittman, Cortland Sutton zone than he is Drake London. And the 2 biggest reasons I think there's a difference between the 2 guys in being Drake London, who I had as a tier 1 prospect. I don't think I view Tet McMillan as a tier 1 prospect. I think I view him as a really good tier 2 prospect. That means like in this class, I think you could probably take him top 10 just because it's not that great of a draft class overall. There's not like a bunch of blue chip studs like there were last year, but in a normal draft class, he's probably not like a top 10 overall player, if that makes sense. But yeah, I still think it's a very good player that I would take in round 1, no question about it. And I actually think he's getting a little bit overthought generally as a player. The couple of the differences between him and Drake London. Drake London, I thought, was a better separator in the quick game. Tet McMillan, kind of like an average separator on slants and curls. London was unbelievable at getting open quickly on slant and curl routes against zone or press man coverage. I think McMillan is more, like I said, okay at that. That's probably the weakest point of him as a separator to me. And I also think Drake London was a bit better of like a ball winner along the boundary. You know, McMillan gets a lot of hype as a ball winner, and I do think he's a good contested catch receiver. But again, I would put it in like if I was to categorize him as a ball winner, I'd say he's a very good ball winner. But do I think it's like a trump card trait for him? No, I don't think so. So that's just why I view Drake London as, maybe we could call him like a Bud Light Drake London, and we can settle it at that.
No, I like that, and I agree with that. I think that makes a lot of sense. Drake London, 100%, you're right. Better prospect overall than I think Tet McMillan. There are things about Tet McMillan's game that I really like. I was surprised, Matt, and walk me through this process here, because obviously I'm not doing the charting here, and neither are our listeners, but a 48.7% success rate on the 9 route. That does surprise me a little bit, because he did win a lot downfield. And also, man, walk me through this, because the contested catch stuff, you can't help but think about contested catch, because, man, Tet McMillan had so many freaking underthrown balls thrown his way where he had to come back to the football. He's mossing guys. He's fighting dudes. It's just, and so again, just walk me through that process there, because just from when you watch the games, the quarterback not doing Tet a lot of favors, and Tet was saving his quarterback a lot. It was almost like and again, I'm not comparing these two players, but it was similar to what we saw Mike Evans do for Johnny Football back at Texas A&M, where, you know, Manziel's throwing him prayer balls, you know, down the middle of the field, and Mike Evans was doing all the heavy lifting. And then it was Johnny Manny, and then it was, you know, Manziel doing the money thing. You know what I'm saying? It was, so I saw a little bit of that with Tet McMillan in his collegiate games at Arizona.
Yeah, honestly, I think you could say that Michael Thomas belongs to this Mike Evans belongs to this, like, Michael Thomas, Drake London family of receivers I'm talking about. Yeah. But Mike Evans is just like a GD freak, you know, like he's different. Just, he might be like the peak of this archetype, because he also happens to run like run like the damn wind out there at that size. And he's also about, like, Mike Evans is 6'5", 230. We're talking about Tet McMillan at 6'4", sub 220. Like, he's a bit of he's just a totally different specimen. I also thought, from a wingspan perspective, McMillan measured in maybe a little bit smaller than I thought. So yeah, again, I just think, like, when I thought some of his worst reps was actually against, like, man coverage, running go routes on the boundary. Now, he does still have the ball skills and the contested catch ability to be a threat there. And, you know, I think teams will respect him as a deep game asset because of that. But is he just going to run a go route on the sideline and get open at a high rate, like a Mike Evans, like I think Drake London does in an underrated way, like Michael Thomas did in an underrated way? It just was never maximized because he was playing with Drew Brees at the end of his career. He's another guy that missed the Jameis window by, like, you know, the Jameis maximization window, Michael Thomas, because he had all those injuries. So no, I don't necessarily view Tet, that's his strength. Where I think he's really, really good as a downfield separator is on breaking routes. I'm talking about posts, corners, outs, digs. Like, I actually think that when you can get him, and even against press man, like, when he can get like a build-up speed and break, I think he's got real deal fluidity at those breaking routes, and he could create a lot of space there and, like, big windows, which is great, because I think the area where he's actually sneakiest and maybe caught me by surprise is after the catch. He was in space on 63% of his catches that I charted in the 8 games for reception perception. He only went down on first contact on 50%. He broke multiple tackles on almost 17% of those plays. He really is able to create a lot after the catch, because he, again, sneaks up on you from a build-up speed perspective. He's got better footwork than you think. So, yeah, I think this idea of him as, like, strictly an X receiver that lines up on the boundary and wins like go routes and stuff is actually a little bit not really where I was impressed with him. I actually think, like he is an X receiver, no doubt about it. Like I think he will be a guy that should line up primarily at X, but much like the Colts do with Michael Pittman, who I think he's like a souped up version of that guy potentially. They also line him off the line of scrimmage. They get him on these in-breaking routes. And I think that would be great for Tet McMillan because I think that's where he separates the best in the intermediate area.
3 areas where I was really, really impressed. 82.5% success rate on the dig route. You guys know me. I love an X receiver that can run a proper dig. Also, 14.1% of his routes were on the dig. So a high dig route participation there for Tet. So I think that will serve him very well in the NFL. And then overall, again, when you take a look at man zone scores, 70.4% success rate versus man, 81% success rate versus zone, and he clears both of those benchmarks that we look for in straight up good players, not just average players, good players. That 70-80 benchmark of man versus zone, I think he clears both of those. Well, he does clear both of those, and I think those are good indicators that this is a high quality player entering the NFL.
Yeah, so to give a couple of comparisons from recent draft classes who are not in this family of wide receivers that I'm talking about, but had very similar success rates in their college profile. Like you mentioned, 70.4 against man, 81 against zone, 73.1% against press, 80th percentile, relatively his best success rate of the three. Brian Thomas Jr. last year, 70.1 against man, 80.4 against zone, and 73.9 against press. Very similar. George Pickens a few years ago, 68.3 against man, 79.7 against zone, 73.2 against press. So similar kind of ballpark all around there with these guys in terms of the historical prospect database in reception perception. Now, obviously, Brian Thomas Jr., who I had ranked higher from like a multi-class ranking perspective than I do Tet McMillan.
Yeah.
Like I think Brian Thomas Jr. would be, again, Travis Hunter aside, who I think is clearly the best receiver in his class. Brian Thomas Jr. would rank ahead of Tet McMillan and all these other guys for me personally. But he's a physical freak. Like he's actually the same kind of build as Tet McMillan. He's just
way
ran
faster.
He ran a 4.340, and like that showed up on tape all the time. That's why he's like already leaps and bounds better than the draft slot that he went into. So that's the difference. But still, from just like a route separation perspective, Tet McMillan's in the same ballpark as Brian Thomas. George Pickens, who I think obviously has had, that's like maybe sort of the range for a guy like this who
totally
George Pickens at times has been like a average separator, but then I think he's gotten really good the longer his career has gone on. He's separated a bit better, but he's still not one of the best separators in the league, but more than good enough to be a quality starting X receiver in the league. And when he's fully engaged with the process, he's a very, very good starting X receiver in the league. So I think T-Mac sort of fits into that ballpark, and those prospect success rates maybe sort of put that into picture here.
I do love that, man, because I think when you're talking about prospects upside, what's this guy's ceiling, what's his median outcome, it definitely feels like Tet McMillan falls between those two. I don't think he will ever get to the heights of BTJ, I think if everything goes right, I think he will be a better player and a more consistent player than George Pickens. Consistency has been an issue with old George there, so we'll see. And I think Tet will be a little bit more in that vein. Now, George Pickens might have higher upside, especially if he stays engaged, but
I guess.
I
guess.
Hey, listen, that's a big if, though,
That's a big if.
That's a big
when we're how many years, 3 years into his career, and we're still doing the if game. That's like,
I know.
We're kind of there. Can I say that the area where Tet McMillan impressed me the most is a route runner.
Yeah.
Because like I said, you pointed this out, the 9 route success rate, 48.7%. It's definitely below average. It's not great, but I do still think teams in college, and I think they will in the NFL as long as his ball skills translate and he's a contested catch ball winner, teams will respect him deep. And dude, when they do, he's a real deal menace is McMillan on comeback routes. I mean, I don't think this will pop off the page to people when they see the profile, but running 6.3% of his sample routes were comebacks, and that 88.9% success rate. I'm telling people, watch how this guy throttles down and works back against man coverage on comeback routes. He creates, this is a guy that people think does not separate. Watch him run comeback routes and tell me this guy can't get open, because like he sells that go route, and again, really just like fluid hips, very bendy, very flexible, and great timing to shut that thing down and get open on comeback routes against man coverage. 88.9% success rate. Very, very impressive. That was the route where the more I saw him run that, and just kind of use those same skills across the route tree, that was like, all right, this guy's a good prospect right here.
I love the fact that, again, this guy is a boundary X receiver, like, 6'4", 220. This is exactly the kind of size and speed that you want to see from a boundary X guy. Was very encouraging. All of his out-breaking routes, all above, the collegiate average there for reception perception. So, and by the way, if you're new to us, receptionperception.com, go check it out.